In this lecture, we are going to talk about optionals and nils. Let's create a playground project, and it's going to be a blank again. I'm going to call this optionals. And let's make it bigger. And what optional is? So optional is another type which is available in Swift if you are coming from a different programming language or from the Objective-C, which is the older programming language of Apple. In Objective-C there are no optionals. I don't know if it exists in other programming languages, I don't know all of them, but the ones I know, it doesn't exist there. So optional in Swift, it's a separate type that it can hold nothing or some kind of value. So imagine it's like a box, and when you open it, it's either nothing there or some kind of value. And optionals can be different types. For var optional string, and this is a string, and we put a question mark. And what question mark means is like it's either it has a value or it doesn't have. So you can remember this this way. So we either have a value or no. And I can also say var optional int is a type of int, and it's an optional. So var optional bool is a type of bool, and it's also an optional. So what happens if I say print, for example, optional string, and if I run, you will see that it prints nil. So currently my variable optional string, and you can actually see the value of all three variables I have just created, it's nil. So none of these things hold any value. We have just a name, but they are currently nil, so we haven't set anything. When it comes to working with optionals, for example, here we have an optional we are printing and it's nil. Sometimes when we are using optionals, Xcode asks us to unwrap it manually. So for example, if I have an optional boolean here, let's say I want to check with some if statement. So I say if optional bool, and then I'm going to do some kind of logic here. And now it says that value of optional type bool not unwrapped. Did you mean, and if I open this up, to use, and it offers me to use exclamatory mark here or a question mark. So when we put an exclamatory mark here, it means that we are force unwrapping our optional value. And this is very dangerous in this situation, because if we don't know that this optional value has some kind of value, by force unwrapping it, we are going to crash our application. So if I run my application, it's going to crash. Let's give it a few seconds to run. And it says our application is crashing, and let's see the reason here. This is not the one. Here it is at the bottom, sorry. It says fatal error, unexpectedly found nil while unwrapping an optional value. This is one of these type of errors that you are going to see a lot when you are working with optionals. So when you see something like this, that unexpectedly found nil while unwrapping an optional, you should check your code what optional variables you have and which ones you are force unwrapping. So in order to not get these errors with optionals when you are using, there are a few different types of different ways of checking if the optional has a value or not. First, you can do an if statement. You can say if, and then you say optional bool is not equals to nil, and then I can say print, and we say optional bool and then we say else, we can say print, we say bool has no value. So if I run now, it automatically prints that bool has no value, because we are checking if our optional boolean is not equals to nil. But also I can check if it equals to nil, and then it's going to evaluate, because currently our optional bool is nil, so this is true, and it prints my optional bool, which is currently nil. So you can see one way is to check if we have an optional value or no, is check if it's not equals to nil. Another way is using if let. So what if let means? We say if let, and you can say some value, which is a temporary variable name. You can call it whatever you want. I'm just saying like this so you can see it has nothing to do with our current value. And we say some value is equal to optional bool, for example. It can be any of the optionals here. It doesn't matter, it's a bool, int, or string, as long as it's optional. So we are checking if this temporary value that we created is equal to one of our optionals, and if it's not nil, our Xcode is going to set the value of some value. And then we have an else statement. Again, I'm going to say, like, let's comment out this one so it doesn't run. Say bool bool has no value, and here I'm going to say print, and let's say we have a value. So if I run my code now, it's going to say bool has no value, because currently our sum value that was set to an optional, it's nil, so this thing has no value, and our if let doesn't work. So another trick with if let is, now we have access to this sum value, so I can say like I can use my sum value constant name here as well. So if I, for example, say optional bool is equals to true, so I'm setting some kind of value, now this code will evaluate, and it's going to print that we have a value, and the value currently is true, because we are using our optional variable here. Then we have also, let's comment this out, we have also guard option to use our optionals. So what guard means is it's guarding something and checks if it's an optional or no. Then it can execute the rest of the code, or it will exit the code. So the guards are used mainly in functions, and they are not used outside. So if I have a func calculate something, and it will take a number, which is my number, which is an int, and this int is an optional, so we are not certain that we are going to pass a value here. So I'm going to first check if my number has any value before I can use my number to do some calculation. So I say guard, and then I say let, and here again you can give it any number. So I can any variable name. I can say any name is equals to my number, and then I say else, and I put parentheses, and the else is what happens when our number is nil. So for example, I want to say print, and we say exit the function, and I'm going to say return. So the reason we are exiting our function, for example, here down below, I'm going to say print, and we say my new number is equals, and we're going to use string interpolation and use my number, and we say like times 4. So if my number that I'm passing here is an optional, it's a nil, I'm sorry, not an optional, because it's already an optional here. So if we don't pass any value here, it's going to crash when we try to call this line here, because when you are using some kind of multiply it, or we try to use it, we need to unwrap it. So now I'm force unwrapping my optional. But before I'm doing it, I have a guard statement. So what my guard does, let's actually run. And in order to see how my function works, I'm going to use my function. So I'm going to say calculate number, and I'm going to pass my optional integer here, which is currently, as you can see, it's a nil. So if I pass my optional integer here, and if I run the code, it's going to say exit the function. So it checks our guard here, checks if our number is nil, which is, it jumps to the else statement. I just put this so you can see what happens, and it exits out our function. So it never reaches and never calls this line of code here because our number is nil. So if I, for example, say that my it's optional integer is equals to 4, and after that I run my code, the guard is going to check, and it sees that I have a number here. It's not an optional, it has some kind of value, and then it just skips this and goes to the second line that I'm actually doing my print statement. It says my new number is equals, and 4 times 4 is 16. So this guard is another way of checking if we have an optional or no. So totally we have 3 ways here. If the optional is not equals nil, we can use it, or we use the if let statement with a temporary value here, and we can also use the temporary value, or we have the guard statement, which is used inside of the function, because we can say return, it just comes out from the function, and then the rest of the function is not executed, because if this optional here is required to do something with our function, we don't want to execute the rest of the function with a nil object, because it's going to crash our application.